Good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to Canadian News Chronicle, your front row seat to the pulse of Canada. From Parliament Hill to prairie towns, we break down the latest in politics, crime, the economy, housing, and everything in between. No spin, no fluff, just the facts that matter to Canadians. This is Episode 2, America-Canada Relations, the Diplomatic Divide. Let's dive in. We find ourselves, once again, in a moment of profound uncertainty, a period where the tectonic plates of the global order are not merely shifting, but grinding against one another with an unsettling intensity. It's a moment that demands clarity, a moment that demands competence, and, frankly, a moment that demands we look at the demon in the eye, however terrifying they might appear. We're witnessing a fundamental reordering of the world itself, a move towards a multipolar landscape where economic and geopolitical forces are converging, demanding a choice, and presenting trade-offs that are not merely inconvenient, but potentially catastrophic if mishandled. And who, precisely, is managing this unfolding drama on the Canadian stage? We must ask ourselves, are we adequately equipped to navigate these treacherous waters? Are we even looking at the map accurately, or are we deluding ourselves with pleasant fictions? Today, we're going to unpack the escalating trade conflicts that Canada finds itself embroiled in, both with our indispensable neighbor to the south and with the increasingly assertive, frankly, authoritarian regime across the Pacific. We will delve into the economic consequences, the political posturing, and the uncomfortable truths that, I believe, Canadians must confront if we are to secure a viable future. Let us begin with the global context, for it is within this broader framework that Canada's specific challenges must be understood. Sean Speer, co-founder and editor-at-large at the Hub Canada, rightly points out that we may look back at this current period as consequential in the organization of the world itself. This is not merely about trade. It is deeply intertwined with geopolitical positioning, security, defense, and even technology. We are, it appears, heading towards a significant bifurcation. On one side, you have the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, increasingly coming together to oppose what they perceive as the Trump administration's aggressive trade war. Brazil, for instance, faces a 50% tariff, China high tariffs over 30%, and India, a surprising 25% tariff, with threats of more if it continues to buy Russian oil. This is indicative of a broader shift, a move away from the post-Cold War era of unipolarity towards a new, more divided, multipolar world. Consider India for a moment. For a long time, the Western foreign policy consensus viewed India as heading towards liberal democracy and market capitalism, a better alternative to China. India was seen as a rising partner, fostering a stronger relationship with the West. However, the Trump administration's aggressive stance towards India signals an end to that era. This shift is pushing India closer into this new geopolitical arrangement with Russia and China. This bifurcation, as Speer describes it, will have significant economic and geopolitical consequences. Now, where does Canada fit into this? That is the question, isn't it? If the world is decoupling into two major trading blocs, a US-led bloc, including Europe and Japan, and another, where do we, as Canadians, stand? The US offer, it must be said, is not the magnanimous, post-World War II extended hand. It comes with trade-offs and costs. The European Union and Japan have clearly decided that this cost is worth it, accepting 15% tariffs to access the US market. These are nations, let's not forget, that were defeated by America 75 years ago, a historical context that perhaps reverberates through these agreements. Canada, in contrast, has a different history with the US, one of an independent country undefeated. This distinct historical relationship, one might argue, should matter. The Prime Minister, Mark Carney, faces monumental decisions, far more complex than merely funding bridges in rural Quebec. He must define Canada's place in an increasingly fractured world. Yet, what we've heard is a deafening silence. While one understands the need for quiet in negotiations, the country needs to hear from its leader a clear theory of the case on how we navigate these shifting dynamics. Let us turn, now, to the direct challenges facing Canada and the rather unsettling truth of our interactions with the so-called economic superpowers. Firstly, China. The situation with China's tariffs on Canadian canola is, frankly, infuriating and, to put it mildly, deeply unfair. Alberta farmers, as we've heard, are waking up to a new reality. China effectively saying, "We don't want Canadian canola anymore." The imposition of a provisional 75.8% tariff on Canadian canola seed, starting last Thursday, potentially means the end of selling this crop in China. As one farmer observed, no Chinese company is going to pay an additional 75% to import canola seed. This comes at an already tough time for an industry dealing with slim margins, having already spent money on fertilizer and other inputs. This move follows closely on the heels of a 100% tariff specifically on canola oil and meal, imposed just months prior. The justification for these tariffs, China claims, is Canada dumping canola seed into its market. However, as Ian Lee, an associate professor at Carleton University, points out, this is a very interesting claim, given that commodity prices are set in well-known global markets like the Chicago Board of Trade. China is effectively complaining that it's paying too little for Canadian canola, which strongly suggests an agenda that has, in fact, nothing to do with canola whatsoever, just more grinding tectonic plates beneath the surface of global trade. What, then, is truly going on? It seems increasingly clear that these tariffs are a direct retaliation for the 100% tariff Canada imposed on Chinese electric vehicles. China's EV industry is enormous and highly successful, holding a 60% world market share. The last thing they want is countries like Canada imposing huge tariffs to slow them down. So, the tariffs on canola were designed to hurt Canada precisely where it hurts most, our agricultural sector in Western Canada. This is, plainly, a politically driven act, not an economic one related to dumping. This is the classic scare the monkey, kill the chicken strategy, targeting Canada to deter others, primarily the U.S., from taking similar action. Adding insult to injury, this comes after China imposed 100% tariffs on Canadian canola oil and meal in March, as well as on pea imports, pork, and seafood exports. To put this in stark context, the Canadian canola industry alone, valued at $43 to $45 billion and employing over 200,000 people, is larger than Canada's steel, aluminum, and car manufacturing industries combined. Yet, what is the official response? Pierre Poilievre blasts Mark Carney for being so silent and so weak, failing to stand up for our farmers. Meanwhile, this same Mark Carney continues to provide a billion-dollar taxpayer-backed loan for BC ferries to buy Chinese-made vessels. Can you imagine? The signal of weakness sent to Beijing is unmistakable. You tax and tariff our farmers, and we'll give you a billion-dollar loan to create jobs in your country. This, precisely, is the kind of weakness that has led to failure after failure. Indeed, the decision to pay a Chinese state-run company $1 billion to build 4 new vessels for BC ferries is hitting choppy waters. As David Dye, the Ferry Workers Union, and the opposition rightly point out, we are rewarding China and Chinese workers, while they punish British Columbia and Canadian workers. The argument from BC Ferries that no Canadian companies bid on the contract and that a low-interest federal loan saves taxpayers money simply glosses over the fundamental geopolitical reality. It is a stunning display of, dare I say, naivety, or perhaps something worse. And then, there's the even more chilling reality. Ron Butler, the mortgage guy, observes that China is a murderous dictatorship that schemes to enslave the world. They control critical minerals, vital elements the West desperately needs to replace China's total dominance. The U.S. understands this and is encouraging production, but Canada, seemingly so stupid, hasn't even started planning roads for its own ring of fire, rich in these critical minerals, for 21 years. This isn't just ineptitude. It's a profound failure to secure our own national interest in a world where energy and resources are becoming increasingly weaponized. China is actively dismantling its vulnerabilities, expanding renewable power, building the world's largest EV industry, and securing sanctioned oil, effectively reducing U.S. leverage. They are using asymmetric responses, making essential inputs scarcer and cutting their exposure to American pressure points. The perception, as our ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, highlights, is that China is let off the hook for everything they're doing, while we are putting so much time and effort into Trump and the United States. This reveals a profound strategic miscalculation, a failure to confront a clear and present danger while obsessing over an uncomfortable ally. This brings us, then, to our relationship with the United States, a relationship that Representative Don Bacon describes as rocky, yet fundamentally equitable and win-win. The tariffs imposed by President Trump are, as Bacon puts it, poisoning the water. Since Prime Minister Carney took office, the Americans have doubled tariffs on Canada while signing deals with Europe, Japan, and other countries. Mark Carney, according to Polyev, has made concession after concession, removing the digital services tax and counter tariffs while getting absolutely nothing in return. His ministers were even sent packing by the Mexicans when trying to get a bilateral deal. It seems, as Polyev laments, American tariffs up and liberal elbows down. On August 1st, President Trump escalated his tariff campaign, raising tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by USMCA from 25% to 35%. He explicitly blamed Canada for failing to cooperate on stopping fentanyl from crossing the border and cited Canada's decision to retaliate against previous tariffs. Prime Minister Mark Carney called the decision disappointing, but vowed to protect Canadian jobs and continue negotiations. Now, the good news, if you can call it that, is that the USMCA, or CUSMA, as it's also known, is, in Goldie Hyder's words, saving us and our economy today. Approximately 90% of goods are USMCA compliant, which blunts the impact of these tariffs. But even with that, the Canadian business community slammed Trump for his fentanyl justification, calling the White House factless. The U.S. ambassador, Pete Hoekstra, offers a rather uncomfortable perspective on Canadian actions. He views Canada's retaliatory tariffs as a huge irritant, especially since Canada has been tariffing U.S. products covered under CUSMA since April, while U.S. goods covered by CUSMA enter Canada tariff-free. This, he argues, calls into question the future of CUSMA. Tellingly, he asserts it's Canada, not the United States, that is calling its future into question. He also points to Canadian provinces by Canadian policies, where they prioritize provincial products, then Canadian, then international, and only then potentially American. This is not the behavior of a reliable, trusted partner, is it? Furthermore, Hoekstra highlights the rhetoric coming from certain Canadian government officials and the media, suggesting a lack of respect for President Trump that, he implies, hinders negotiations. He finds it difficult to understand the passionate anger that Canadians seem to have towards Donald Trump and the United States, especially when the U.S. continues to be Canada's biggest customer and has not been vindictive. He notes that some Canadians are proud of the fact we're not traveling to America anymore and are encouraged to do that by their government leaders, a very different tone and tenor than what's seen from the American side. This is not merely an emotional outburst. It has real consequences. U.S. liquor producers, for example, are facing significant economic pain, with sales in Canada falling by over 66% between March and April due to counter-tariffs and boycotts. Kenneth Rogoff, a Harvard economics professor, unequivocally states that Donald Trump has absolutely and totally won this round of the trade war. While Trump's policies may lead to higher prices, more mediocre goods, and slower growth for the U.S., the fact is, tariffs are politically popular in the United States. Rogoff notes that the U.S. imports only 11% of its consumption, so it doesn't feel the impact as much as other countries. Counter-tariffs, while they might feel good, are inflationary for Canadians and could have a negative kickback on a fragile economy. This, precisely, is the uncomfortable truth. Feeling good is not a strategy. So, what has been the Canadian response, beyond the liberal elbows-down approach? We've seen some attempts at, shall we say, counterpunches, though not always with the desired effect. Provinces like Ontario and Alberta have indeed begun to pivot their financial strategies away from Wall Street. Ontario, under Doug Ford's administration, issued a $2 billion Yankee bond, its first without a single U.S. bank since 2011, instead turning to Barclays and Canadian institutions. This was a calculated move, a direct answer to Trump's tariffs on steel, tech, and automotive components. Ontario, which expects to borrow $60 billion this year, with nearly a third from foreign markets, is now deliberately bypassing Wall Street. This is not just a fiscal maneuver. It is, quite clearly, a geopolitical statement, shifting financial partnerships towards London and Frankfurt. Alberta has followed suit, floating $1.25 billion in bonds without Bank of America, breaking a 6-year streak, with Barclays, RBC, and TD handling the job. Alberta is also redirecting its oil exports, restarting tanker routes towards Asia and the Gulf of Mexico, backed by European insurers and bankers. This means that for industries like trucking and energy-linked commercial vehicles, their next financing deal might come from Frankfurt rather than Philadelphia. Beyond finance, Ontario's new procurement rules now favor Canadian and allied vendors over U.S. ones. This means that software firms in Seattle or steel suppliers in Pittsburgh will have a tougher time cracking bids unless no local option exists. This is reshaping who wins government contracts, from municipal broadband systems to bolts in car frames, and impacting procurement patterns within Ontario's factories. This is a slow-burning shift. Yet, despite these moves, the direct impact of Trump's tariffs on the U.S. auto industry has been severe. General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford have reported billions in tariff-related costs, leading to falling profits and the disappearance of 37,000 manufacturing jobs in the U.S. These costs are inevitably being passed on to consumers, leading to higher sticker prices and potentially pushing entry-level models off the market. Electric vehicle makers face an additional hurdle, as the U.S. still lacks large-scale domestic battery manufacturers, forcing reliance on heavily taxed imports. So, while Canada tries to outlast short-term shocks, the U.S. is also feeling the consequences, albeit in a different way. We've surveyed the landscape of global trade and the immediate pressures on Canada. Now, let us delve into the deeper questions of leadership, vision, and the path forward. As the American saying goes, if you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity. And one must ask, is that not precisely what we are seeing from the current government? Pierre Poilievre paints a damning picture. He argues that since Prime Minister Carney took office, it has been American tariffs up and liberal elbows down, all talk and no action. He reminds us that Mark Carney promised to negotiate deals and end tariffs, but the result has been failure after failure. Poilievre's critique extends beyond trade deals. He points to Carney's plan to ban gas trucks and cars, a ban that would begin phasing in just months from today. He asserts this policy will kill jobs, balloon costs, and grind rural communities to a halt, making it impossible for farmers and resource workers to do their jobs. EVs don't work well over long distances or in cold weather, he argues, and the policy could literally erase many small towns from the map. Hyperbole, perhaps, but a legitimate concern given the practical realities of vast, cold Canadian landscapes. This highlights a profound ideological divide on the direction of our economy. Another glaring issue is transparency. The Carney Liberals have stopped releasing public information on immigration numbers, with no updates since March. Meanwhile, Statistics Canada sends mixed signals. Quarterly population estimates show minimal growth, yet monthly jobs reports show workforce increases due to immigration. Michelle Rempel, a Conservative MP, suggests the government is hiding data for political reasons, realizing they've messed up a system Canadians once supported. This pattern of dodging accountability on immigration, the economy, housing, and safety suggests a broken system, leaving Canadians paying the price. When the government hides numbers, it shows a lack of confidence in its own policies and a disrespect for the public's right to know the truth. So, if the current approach isn't working, what is the alternative? What is the path forward? The current predicament compels us to consider genuine solutions rooted in competence and a clear-eyed understanding of reality. Canada must focus on building economic strength from within, rather than merely reacting to external pressures. One of Canada's strongest cards is energy. The U.S. relies on millions of barrels of Canadian oil and gas daily. Imposing tariffs on this flow would raise U.S. consumer prices, a cost Washington is unlikely to risk. This interdependence gives Canada leverage to absorb tariff pressure while building alternative markets. Goldie Hyder cautions against weaponizing energy, calling it Russian roulette. But Ambassador Hoekstra says the U.S. is open to expanding its energy footprint with Canada, including oil, gas, nuclear, and small modular reactors, to keep prices low and power North American industries like AI. Beyond energy, Canada holds vast reserves of critical minerals, lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and rare earths, essential for EVs, AI, defense, and energy storage. While mineral production exceeded $70 billion in 2023, most remain underground or underdeveloped, and few refineries operate domestically. Carney's government is reportedly racing to correct this imbalance, positioning Canada as a complete supply chain partner. This is more than a mineral boom. It's a bargaining chip, especially as China tightens export controls. Legislation like Bill C-5 aims to reduce delays and build refining capacity. Carney's strategy is structural, not reactive, designed to make Canada indispensable. This is the kind of long-term strategic thinking that is required. Furthermore, Canada must successfully navigate the renegotiation of the USMCA/CUSMA agreement. This is critical for economic stability. The U.S. ambassador says they're looking for concrete proposals from Canada to finalize the deal. Trump's focus is on prosperity, safety, and security for Americans. If Canadian priorities align, a way to work together should be found. The question of counter-tariffs remains contentious. Lisa Raitt suggests revisiting them, asking if they truly achieve results or just hurt Canada. Goldie Hyder argues dollar-for-dollar tariffs aren't sustainable. The U.S. economy is 10 times larger and doesn't feel the impact. Counter-tariffs would be inflationary in Canada and could have a negative kickback on our fragile economy. This is a pragmatic, not emotional, assessment. It makes no sense to punish your own citizens in the name of symbolic retaliation. Finally, we must contemplate Canada's place in this increasingly fractured world and the choices that demand courage and clear-headedness. Bill Hawkins, a trade expert, frames this starkly. Canada and the Western world are being pressed by the United States to effectively pick a side between the legacy power of the U.S. and the rising power of China. This choice carries profound implications, reflecting ideological differences between democracy and authoritarian communism. It's not a painless choice, nor an easy path. China is our second-largest canola market, after the U.S., making any sudden forsaking of that market economically challenging. Hawkins argues this choice is not merely about sovereignty, but about adhering to fundamental principles, safeguarding against trade practices that are highly distortive, highly injurious, and that, if allowed to continue, will truly decimate entire industries. If we genuinely care about fair labor practices, environmental standards, and sustainable jobs, then we must pursue a concerted approach, managing trade-offs while sticking to our principles. Chinese EV pursuit, Hawkins says, is not a clean, green, sustainable pursuit. Crucially, Hawkins cautions against viewing everything through an "I hate Donald Trump" lens or a loss of sovereignty lens. These emotional filters prevent us from seeing the situation clearly and making necessary strategic decisions. The very things many people claim to care about, the environment, labor, strategic industries, are precisely what necessitate this difficult alignment. The U.S. ambassador, Pete Hoekstra, highlights this disconnect. He struggles to understand the passionate anger some Canadians express toward Trump and the U.S., especially when the U.S. remains a crucial trading partner and ally. He notes the U.S. sees Canada as a good partner and reliable ally for economic, military, and political cooperation. This includes confronting threats from China and addressing issues like fentanyl. The fundamental alignment of priorities, prosperity, safety, and security in both countries ought to provide a basis for cooperation. Therefore, the imperative is clear. Canada must get its relationship with the United States straight and settled. This will be tough, requiring engagement with a highly undesirable negotiating counterparty for some Canadians. But the world is what it is, and we must face it as such. The alternative is to be consumed by internal divisions and external pressures, losing our way in a chaotic world. We are at a crossroads, where decades of prosperity are fading due to bad policy and lack of vision. Ron Butler bluntly puts it, "We're getting smoked on an international level in so many ways, yet we keep doing the same things that hurt us over and over again." The current government under Mark Carney faces accusations of weakness, lack of transparency, and strategic missteps. We see a willingness to engage with China through taxpayer-backed loans, even as China imposes devastating tariffs on our key agricultural sectors. This signals a profound lack of resolve. We hear rhetoric about trade deals, yet see consistent failure to secure them, coupled with policies like the proposed EV ban that threaten to cripple vital segments of our economy. In contrast, provinces like Ontario and Alberta are taking more decisive action, reorienting financial partnerships and procurement policies away from the U.S. Combined with Canada's potential in energy and minerals, this offers a path to self-strengthening and leverage. But ultimately, the fundamental choice remains. Do we succumb to emotional, partisan narratives that cloud judgment, or do we confront the reality of a global landscape demanding strategic alignment and competence? Do we continue to be perceived as stupid and inept on the world stage, or do we become smart? The path forward demands courageous leadership, prioritizing national interest over political posturing, and a commitment to transparency. It means shedding the illusion that we can wish away global complexities or ignore uncomfortable truths. It requires that we, as Canadians, demand better, demand clarity, and hold our leaders accountable to the highest standards of competence and foresight. For the very future of this country, its prosperity and its sovereignty depend on it. So here we are, not at the end, but at the beginning of a reckoning. Canada must choose competence over comfort, sovereignty over sentiment, and strategy over slogans. The world won't wait for us to get our act together. We must demand better, act smarter, and lead with clarity. Because if we don't, if we keep drifting, we won't just lose prosperity. We'll lose ourselves. Thanks for listening to Canadian Chronicle, where we decode the headlines shaping Canada's future. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who cares about Canada as much as you do. Follow the show on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and leave a rating or comment to let us know what you think. Stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, keep questioning.